All right, I'm here with a woman named Grace, who's a influencer in my life, and she has a experience of demoralization versus burnout in her world too. She's not a teacher, she's not in the education world, but she is an attorney, and so she can speak to a lot of what teachers deal with in terms of demoralization and burnout. So I just got together with her, and we're just going to share our thoughts and go from there. So, obviously, like, I see that all the time in the teaching world. Like, people that I work with feel burned out, and they kind of say, like, that's the end point. That's, you're done. There's no coming back from a burnout for whatever reason. But demoralization, we see in the education world where there is a way to come back. It's the same symptoms as burnout, but it's caused by different things. And so when a teacher feels demoralized, it might be because the administration's preventing them from being what they think is what their students need, or parents are preventing the teacher from being what they think is the best thing for the student, or the student's work ethic is preventing things, or whatever. It's just the teacher gets to a point where they feel they're trying to do their job and be good at their job and serve the needs of their students, but for whatever reason they're getting prevented from doing that, and they get to that point of just being demoralized. And so in both areas, the outcome in demoralization and burnout both leads to leaving the profession, but it doesn't have to be that way when things are demoralized. So do you experience that in your world too?
Yeah, I definitely do. I think what's interesting is, the different facets of demoralization that you experience in the teaching world, I think can be translated to many different professions, including the field that I'm in as an attorney. You say the administration, sometimes you don't get support from your administration. That's kind of how my world is. Sometimes you don't get support from your firm, or you don't get support from your bosses directly. And, when you say you deal with issues with parents, and I have a few friends who are teachers as well, and I hear so many stories of you just can never make the parents happy. Whether it's one kid that they have or two kids that they have that you've taught in the past. It's kind of like client relations with us. We have clients that it seems you're constantly doing exactly what they've asked, but it's just not good enough, or they come back at you and say, I think this could be better, or why didn't you address this issue? And I think that's something that teachers probably experience on a daily basis as well, trying to figure out.
So you get to a point where, like, you are trying and you're trying to do the best job that you think, but a boss keeps coming back at you with, why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that?
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's something that's constantly evolving, right? So if you have a parent saying, why aren't you teaching my kid this way, or why aren't you teaching my kid that way? So then maybe you'll alter something, but then you might have another parent say, well, that's not how my kid learns best, right? Yeah. So that can kind of be that can be translated into my world as well.
So do you work for? Because, like how you were saying with me, like my bosses, quote unquote, could be considered the students I teach. It could be considered my department chair. It could be considered other people that teach the same subject as me. It could be my principal. It could be the district superintendent. It could be parents. I mean, like, I imagine that I have a slew of bosses. We call them stakeholders, but they all kind of dictate how I have to do my job. Do you have multiple bosses too?
It's interesting that you can kind of rattle off all of those different areas of quote unquote bosses. I think our world is a little different, and we may not get information from so many different outlets like you do. We really do just kind of have your immediate boss, or however many you might have in that firm, and then your clients at the end of the day are essentially the biggest boss that you have. Your work product needs to ensure that you're making them happy. So I think it's interesting taking it from a teacher's perspective, and how many people that you need to please. So it's not only the parents, it's not only the kids. There are so many different people that you need to appease, and you're also working with a number of teachers, right? So sometimes we work with different attorneys in our office, but we don't necessarily have to collaborate all the time with other attorneys. Whereas, I've heard friends talk about, they have an issue with a child and they need to make sure they loop in the dean, and they need to loop in the guidance counselor.
Yeah.
So there are so many people that they need to loop in.
Like the classic CC list on the email.
Exactly. So, sometimes we run into those issues, but I think that's something that is so interesting in the teaching world that I don't know how many other professions really encounter that issue where so many people need to be looped in, and so many people need to consider, okay, we've got maybe a social worker, right, that needs to be contacted. Yeah. All these different people that have significant interest in this student's upbringing and in the student's education, and you have to weigh all of those. And I'm not a educator, but I would assume that could be weighing over time, which could lead to that ultimate demoralization and or ultimate burnout. At the end of the day, how many people do I need to make happy, and how many opinions do I need to consider in order to respond to this parent or respond to this boss or respond to this department head?
Gotcha. Yeah, it's crazy. Education just seems like another facet of industry. It's just another sector of the economy, but when you dive in, there are similarities, but then there's so many more unique things, because you're dealing with lives, you're dealing with minds, you're dealing with young lives and young minds that can't sometimes quite rationalize for themselves yet. So it just becomes this whole convoluted and tough thing, and everyone's trying to do what they think is right. And yeah, I think that's where all those different opinions must come from.
Yeah, and I think another thing that's interesting too that just came to mind is, when you have different professions, say an attorney or a medical doctor, it's not often when you have a client saying, well, I can do this job better than you can, right? Because people say, okay, well, you have that degree, you have that experience, that's why I'm coming to you because I don't know this particular area of law, or I don't know this particular area of medicine, that's why I'm seeking your expertise. Teachers have an expertise, but I think oftentimes parents may have this assumption that, well, I could just do your job better, why don't you do this? And I mean, we see it in the media, right? Yeah. Teachers are constantly hounded. You don't turn on the news and see attorneys being hounded or medical doctors being hounded to the same extent that we are so critical of our teachers, which again can lead to that, why can't we make everybody happy? Everybody is coming at us from all these different angles. So I think that is another thing that can be difficult for the education world as well.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Another thing that this course has covered, and actually it's kind of the foundation of the course, and why I've decided to take it, it has to deal with, to avoid demoralization and even to avoid burnout, is taking time for yourself. And so I guess my question is, do you have that same experience that teachers often have, where you just find yourself work, and you just dive 110% into your work or your professional life, and you forget to take time for yourself? Does that happen in the legal world?
That absolutely happens in the legal world, yes. Okay. I think, for those of, whoever's going to listen to this, I'm in the type of law industry where I'm on the billable hour. So I need to bill a certain amount of hours of work a day, a week, a month, and a year. So that's not to say, okay, if I sit in front of my computer for 8 hours, that means I've hit my hours. No, it's how much time I'm billing to the client. So I do oftentimes have a really hard time finding that quote unquote me time to facilitate that self-care, which I think would be useful to ensure that you're not heading down that path towards burnout. I think definitely in my profession, it's something that I know I struggle with, and I am sure that a number of people struggle with. And I would imagine teaching, when do you turn it off? When do you stop getting parent emails? When do you stop getting student questions? And when a student questions you got to answer, right? Because you're trying to do the best for them. it's hard. It's hard to turn it off. I think that's true in most professions, but I think in teaching, and I know my profession, it's, we're on the clock 24/7, so it is hard to turn it off.
So we have various professional education organizations that write articles, that do studies, that share publications with us, and as teachers, we're I don't want to say constantly as a negative thing, but I feel like our profession is largely aware that people come and go, and this idea that whether it's people start as a teacher and then whatever, several years later, and maybe a decade goes by, and then they leave the profession, or they come in later, try it, nope, leave it. And a lot of times it centers around this idea of burnout, of demoralization. And so I'm wondering, does the legal community have professional organizations that also have similar statistics? Like, are you aware that lawyers, I don't want to say often, but it's not unheard of for lawyers to get into the profession, or for people to get into the profession, become a lawyer, practice, and then leave it?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely organizations that address that issue and kind of help attorneys, especially younger attorneys, deal with those issues. I do think that there is a turnover rate. That's the phrase, turnover. There yeah. So I think there is a turnover rate. However, I think it is maybe pushed back a little more. I think people practice a little longer before they realize, this isn't for me.
Okay.
I think there's a lot of factors that go into that. I don't think it's just demoralization and or burnout. I think that can also be a financial strain. Law school is expensive. People take out loans. Yeah. They've got to pay those things off, which is something that our profession, it's kind of that other weight on your back that people consider when, selecting positions and whatnot. Yeah. That being said, I think there is turnover within certain firms and within certain areas of law. Sometimes people don't practice in those areas for as long as other areas for whatever reason. Okay. But I wouldn't say that it's not what I know of. I wouldn't say a majority of people enter the area of law and then. So
it's not a prevalently discussed thing. It's like it's out there, but every industry has it. So
I don't think so, and I think one of the main reasons is there's, when you go to school to become a teacher, you're a teacher, or an administrator, or something in the education world. When you go to school to become an attorney, yes, a lot of people come out of law school and practice at a law firm. However, after practicing at a law firm, some people still practice law, but they do, they take in-house counsel positions with companies, or they, do other things within administration of different companies that might not technically be a general counsel or an attorney. However, they use those skills from law school and what they've learned over the course of their career. They'd still consider themselves attorneys, but they might not, quote unquote, be practicing law. So I think it's probably harder to determine how many people enter the area of law and then leave it. Whereas with a teacher, okay, if you're a teacher now and then all of a sudden you're working at a company in sales, clearly you've left the education profession.
Right, it's got black and white.
Yeah, a little different.
You don't yeah. Have you, in your legal profession, have you been at a firm or a company where you've witnessed either a colleague leave, and whether you knew it or not, whether you suspected it or not, due to a feeling of demoralization or burnout? Like, have you witnessed that secondhand?
I think I don't know if I've witnessed it. I definitely can guess that people probably have. Another thing that's interesting about this topic is it's not easy to open up about.
Right.
So,
yeah, very private.
It is, and it's a private matter. It's something that you either hold on to internally or maybe talk with family and friends about, if even.
Okay.
So if someone is leaving a firm because they're burned out, chances are they're not going to cite to that, right. And chances are they're not going to share that with current colleagues. That being said, oftentimes you can pretty much guess, that person burned out, and you can also guess whether they burned out. Are they leaving this firm to go to a different firm, well, they probably didn't get burned out. They're just,
just a new opportunity.
It's a new opportunity.
Okay.
Did they leave this firm to then do something completely different that has nothing to do with the area of law that they practice in? Yeah, that was probably a burnout then. I've seen that maybe a couple of times, but, And
I guess the reason I brought that up is because as a follow-up, like you're someone that has had a huge influence on me for a large part of my life, so we're in two different worlds, but if you had seen that, I was going to say, so what do you do in your legal world, especially when you observe it affecting someone else, to avoid reaching that burnout phase or avoid reaching that demoralization phase? Have you had to come up with strategies?
I think sometimes you just need to articulate to the people that you work with and you work for certain expectations that you need to have met to ensure that you're not burned out. And, people need to respect that, and people need to understand where you're coming from. That being said, you're not going to email a boss and say, I'm working too hard, I need to work less, but expect everything.
Don't email me after 4 p.m.
Exactly. So, you have to prove that you're worthy of those maybe leniency issues sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But I do think it's important to articulate, and this can go towards self-care. It's important to, stand up for yourself and say, I'm getting to that point. I need a moment. I need a second. And whether you can figure out certain issues that need to be addressed within your job personally, or whether you just need more time with your family, sometimes is something that a lot of people need. And you can't just expect those things to be given to you, right? You need to ask for them, and you need to articulate to the people that you work with and you work for that, so that they understand where you're coming from.
Gotcha. Well, thank you for sitting down with me. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks for the influence that you've had in my life, and this was a really nice opportunity just to kind of trade thoughts on a common topic that we both share in two very different professional worlds. So I really appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Grace.
Thank you.